And then I took soil samples and I sent it to the ATF lab. When it came time, we ended up arresting the guy, and we sent it to the ATF lab for analysis. And at the time, it was a 1-ton truck that he was driving. So I took the mud flaps off the truck, sent it back. I asked them to do a neutron activation analysis on it. They called me back and said, our cyclotron is broken. We can't do that. So I said, what are you going to do? And they said, we're going to do an atomic weight analysis of your soil samples. So I said, okay, great. So come time to go to the trial, and there's this strange guy in the office, in the prosecutor's office, and he says, hi, I'm from the ATF lab, and we had the defense attorney in there. He says, I'm prepared to testify that the soil samples you sent me, the soil samples off the mud flap could not come from more than 150 feet away from your samples you sent me. So the guy walked in and pled guilty.
Can you introduce yourself for me, please?
I'm Skip Nakashima.
And Skip, who did you work for?
Boise Police Department.
And Skip, can you, when did you, give me an idea, when did you start with Boise PD and when did you retire?
I started with Boise PD October of 1967. I retired the end of February 2001.
And Skip, tell me a little bit about growing up, and was there anything in your background growing up that led you to law enforcement?
Yes, I grew up on a farm and a small town, population 2,000, I think 2,800. And so we got to know everybody got to know us. And there was a police officer there by the name of Alvin Allen. And he I wanted to be like him, I guess. He was a good guy. He worked with all the people. Later on, found out that what he was doing was community policing, but we didn't have a name for it at the time.
And where was that farm that you grew up? What town did you grow up in?
It was in Nyssa, Oregon.
Nyssa, Oregon.
Yeah,
okay.
Right across the Idaho border.
And so he was doing community policing and just kind of that outreach, and you were just kind of drawn to him because why? He was a good guy, or?
He was a good guy, but if you were doing things wrong, he let you know it. I think that he applied the law with reasonable discretion. He issued warnings, he issued citations, he made arrests, but I never heard anybody complain about him being one way or too much one way or the other. He just really did represent and did good for the community. And that's what I decided I wanted to do.
What age do you think that you realized that was what you wanted to do?
16.
16 years old.
Had my driver's license and stayed out after curfew.
Okay, so how do you get to Boise PD? What takes you there? How do you decide to go to Boise?
Well, after immediately while I was still in high school, I enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve. And so upon graduation of high school, I went on active duty in the Marine Corps for 6 months. After that, I went down, at the time, my occupational specialty was infantryman. And that was in 61, 62. In 62, we had an opportunity to select a duty station on active duty, which would be guaranteed as long as it was Southeast Asia. And so a bunch of my buddies wanted to go, and I said, well, I have to go back and talk to my girlfriend about it. I went back home, found out she had dumped me, so I was kind of at a loss. So I kind of bounced around, and I have to say, we were talking about this the other day, I think I did about everything a person could do without a college degree. I worked as a short order cook, as a disc jockey, as a mechanic on farm equipment. I was on the farm. I operated a lot of equipment. I ended up with a ditch line company where I was the person who was in charge of blasting the rocks with dynamite. Um, so I did all those things, and it was really uh, what I think prepared me to be a good policeman
How
because,
so?
well, I was working with, of course, I was working with farm laborers, migrant farmer or migrant workers, regular people working. I found out that they were all hardworking people. Not all of them, but majority of them were hardworking people. They had the same goals that we have, and so that helped me in dealing with the people that I was dealing with later on in life as a policeman. And then in Boise, at the time during my career, it was kind of understood that if you had a problem and you didn't know what to do or how to solve it, call a policeman. So we would get sent on all kinds of weird calls. And my exposure to this variety of things, to me, helped prepare me for handling these things like that. So, yeah.
So why did you decide Boise? What brought you there?
Uh, it was by chance. I went to work for a variety store chain, and they transferred me around. And uh, the last place they transferred me to was Boise, and I didn't like the way they were doing it. And upon graduation, or right after, early on in my career, I wanted to be a policeman, and so I was looking at the Oregon State Police, but I was too short. So then, about, like I said, I wound up here in Boise, and they advertised for officers, and I saw that I met the height requirement by half an inch. So I applied and got the job.
I'm curious, what was the height requirement? Do you remember?
5'8".
5'8".
And I
Okay,
was 5'8.5".
so
Yeah.
so you had to be 5'8". Okay, all right. Um, can you talk a little bit about when you started with Boise? What was the training like back then?
Oh, the training was uh, almost non-existent. We did have a little booklet they handed us. We had an 8-hour training um, put on in-house. Then we went out and rode with experienced officers. Uh, and I don't know what the criteria was for that. I ended up riding with three different officers, um, 1 week with each officer, and then I was out on my own. And
Wow.
of course, one of the things that we did at the time, Boise Police Department had a very good shooting program. We had a pistol team that went back to nationals and was the best for years, known, recognized statewide as the best team in the state. So I got a lot of training on that. When I first started, I expressed interest in that, so I was going up shooting a PPC 3 times a week, 60-round PPC. So,
I'm curious. One of my previous interviews was with Dale Rogers. Did you know Dale? Was
yeah.
Was he on the shooting team with you at the time?
No, he came afterwards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So we had, but the guys we had they went back to, we can't think of the place where the national match was. Camp Perry. We went to Camp Perry shooting.
Hmm.
So yeah. So that's the best training we had was shooting. And the rest of that was almost non-existent. In fact, I can tell you one time, my experience on making an arrest was I was downtown riding with the officer downtown, and we were going through the alley, and there was a guy laying there. And so he stopped and rolled down the window, and he hollered at the guy, yelled at the guy, and said, "Get in the back." So the guy called in the back, and we took him to jail. That was the arrest, my only arrest experience I had. So that during that time, possession of marijuana was a felony. And this was night shift. One of the officers jumped a bunch of guys up at Crest Line and Bogus Basin Road, and they ran. And so we went up to search. And so my experienced officer I was with got out to search, and he told me to take the car and drive up the road. So I did. And it was Bogus Basin Road. And of course, I'm new to Boise. I'm new to, basically, I lived in Boise for like a year, but I never traveled around or anything. So I drive up Bogus Basin Road until I'm up in the sagebrush, and I think I must be out of city limits now. So I turn around and I'm driving down the road, and I had my spotlight shining to the left down in the borrow pit, and I'm kind of just easing down there, and there's a guy laying there, and so I stopped my car and I rolled down the window. I said, "Get in the back." So he gets in the back, and I go back to where the rest of the officers were, and I get out and I say, "I got one of them. He's in the car." And they run over and grab him, jerk him out, handcuff him, search him, and everything. That was my first felony arrest.
Wow.
So, back then training was lacking, you might say.
So, Skip, when you started, how old were you?
I think I was 24, I think.
24.
Yeah.
What was a typical call for you on patrol back then?
Oh, well, like I said, we did everything. We got burglaries, vandalism, traffic stops, family fights, and the rookies, they always put us on night shifts. So I was working the graveyard shift from 10 at night to 6 in the morning for like 5 years. So.
Any interesting stories that you remember from those early days?
Not dead.
Well, how about later on patrol? Any interesting stories that you remember?
One time, it was kind of funny. We got a call at a local restaurant. There was a guy in there with a gun, and it was like 3 in the morning. So we go down there, and there's 2 waitresses there. And so we see the guys. They're the only people in the restaurant, and they're in the corner booth. And so I'm the primary, and Huey is my backup guy, Hugh McNicholson. So I said, "Okay, Huey," I said, bring the shotgun." I said, "I'll go down," and it was a narrow area between the counter and the booth. And I had to go from the front door all the way down the length of the restaurant to get to these guys. So I said, "You come in right, I'll go in first, you go in right behind me. If the guy makes a move for the gun, I'm going to hit the deck and you shoot right over the top of me." So he said, "Okay, got it." So we go in, and of course the 2 ladies are standing there behind the counter, and we walk in and we just go in, boom, like that. I'm walking down there. Huey stepped in behind me, jacks around in the shotgun. One of the ladies covers her ears and the other lady covers her mouth. I go down, and luckily the guy with the gun was right on the corner. So I just walked up to him, put my hand on his back, slid it down to his waistband, pulled the gun out, said, "Come out with me." And there was no problem or anything. Later on, we went back, and I asked the lady, I said, "Why did you cover your mouth?" I could understand covering your ears. And she didn't have a reason. But, those are, something that stands out about that.
Skip, when you started on patrol, how big was Boise at the time?
I think it was right. Well, I don't know. At the time I started, about 4 or 5 years later, it was 72,000. Because we were talking, and somebody said that we were going to grow to over 100,000. And I said, "No way." So yeah.
So I bet you in your 30 years, I'm sure you saw that it just explode around here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. At the time when I started, there were some times when we were shorthanded. We'd have 1 car on the bench, 1 car in the valley, and 1 car in between, and that was the extent of our patrol on the graveyard shift. It's unbelievable. You could think that you could do that now. But
4 or 5 cars total on graveyard.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was it. And but the city limits was a lot smaller then too. But still, that was pretty thin. Yeah.
And I'm assuming no 2-man cars at the time. It was only you.
No. In fact, throughout my career, the only time we had 2-man cars was when we switched to the 410 plan. Because working 4 days a week, one day of the week, you had both teams on. We had a team policing concept. So everybody on the team was off the same days, worked the same hours, same days off, same days on. So we had an overlap, and we didn't have enough cars. So we put 2 guys in the car. That's the only time that we had 2-man cars, unless you were working a special unit. Like At one time, we had what they called a beat team that just worked the downtown area. And that was a two-man car, but it was a special team that just did that. They didn't handle outside normal patrol calls or anything. So,
talking a little bit about your specialty units that you were part of over your career, you went from patrol, and at some point you start working in narcotics. Tell me a little bit about working in narcotics.
well, that was different. We were a federally funded pilot project, and it was the beginning of the city-county narcotics units. And so there was 6 of us. We had a sergeant and a training officer and 2 guys from the county and 2 guys from the city. And it was a very unique situation. First of all, in order to be in that unit, you had to, not only were you interviewed, but your wife was interviewed.
Really? How come?
Yeah, they called her in to, I guess, to see if they thought you were compatible or she was okay with you working dope or whatever. But they called her in and interviewed her too. We also had a special frequency radio, and we had pagers. And so although we had the low band radios that the police department was using, we also had our own radio band, which nobody could monitor except us. And so that was kind of different. They also swore us in statewide, gave us statewide jurisdiction, state officers. And so consequently, we did a lot of work with not only the surrounding agencies, but also the adjacent states. A lot of times we would, one case would spill over to another jurisdiction. Of course, anytime we went over outside the state, well, then we always coordinated with the agency there. And but it was just a accepted thing. That's what we would do. Our 6-man unit accounted for over 30% of the state lab's workload at the time. And we had about a 94% conviction rate on all of our dope cases.
How long did you work narcotics?
A little over a year.
And what kind of cases were you working on during that time?
During that time, because we were a pilot project and everything, anything connected with dope got assigned to us. So the first case that I worked on in going to work, which was kind of interesting, I reported in Monday morning and they sent me down to the hospital to witness and photograph an autopsy on a contract homicide. And that was the first case that we ended up working. And interestingly enough, the perpetrator had a perfect alibi that we were able to pierce, but he was in prison at the time that he committed the homicide. And
was it drug related then?
Yeah, it was drug related. The person that was killed was an informant for the investigator for the state Department of Pharmacy. Yeah.
What were the drugs that were being dealt in Boise at that time?
At the time, this was 1971. And so the drug hierarchy, if you will, turned upside down. So prior to that time, it was my understanding, the upper class people, upper economic people were doing cocaine. The lower economic people were doing heroin. The ones in between were doing other things. At that time, we made heroin cases on business people. We made cocaine cases on street people. We had LSD. We had MDT. We had all sorts of everything that you could think of that was coming out. This was the days of Timothy O'Leary and all that stuff going on.
I'm assuming meth wasn't big back then.
Meth?
Yeah, meth.
No, but amphetamines was. Amphetamines was really big, and we were finding people who was injecting amphetamines. We had one guy, I remember, that was injecting the ashes of marijuana because he just got so wrapped up in doing the dope and was trying to get high and salvaging anything he could, So then we also got assigned burglary of a drugstore, armed robberies of drugstores, arson of a drugstore, anything connected with drugs. Also, at that time, every overdose that was taken to the hospital, we were sent to, because we were interacting, I guess, with the drug population, and so the illicit drug population. And so if a person come in, they were hoping that we could give the doctors some information about what might be wrong with this guy. Because, like I say, at the time, those street drugs were coming in and nobody knew what they were doing or anything. And so consequently, because of that, we also got, everyone in the unit, one time or another, got recognized in court as being a drug identification expert. And so, which was kind of interesting, because it got to the point where we go to court on somebody. And at the beginning, of course, the defense attorneys would always ask our credentials before we could testify as an expert witness. There towards the end, they would just stipulate we were an expert, because they did not want the jury to hear what our expertise was on that. So that was kind of interesting. We had one defense attorney that wanted an investigation on us, because his contention was nobody could make as good a case as we claimed to be making. And so he wanted our unit investigated for that. We had a gang here that was doing a lot of marijuana and terrorizing the public and stuff. They were just basically no good guys. And so we were making a lot of cases on it. So one judge, one time, they slashed a couple of our tires, and we arrested them. And of course, when we arrested them, they had dope on them. So we were charged with a dope too. And the judge dismissed the case. And he said it sounded to him like it was just a personal battle between the narcs and the dopers. And that was it. You know, we had one dealer that blew up our informant's car. It was really he was pretty smart about it. He took some dynamite and he put it in the firewall of her car. It was a female informant, and put it in the firewall and attached the wire to the turn signal on the car. So her husband was in the Army Reserve, and on his drill weekends, she would ride with him, and they would go down to the reserve center, and then she would drop him off, take the car, and go home, and then pick him up later. Well, that particular day, she didn't go. And he drove down, turned on the turn signal to go in, and the bomb went off. It took the jockey box door, and if she would have been in the passenger seat, would have taken her head off, or forehead off. But she wasn't there. It bulged the roof of the car. The crime scene was a block long, forward and backwards.
Did he die?
Years later, I was talking to, somehow or another, the incident came up, and this guy I was talking to, or was in the group, was the husband who was in the car at the time, and all it did was break his eardrums. It's just really interesting. But the other thing, what's interesting, and we had this happen with several of our informants, was their spouse or significant other did not know we were they were informing for us. And this guy had no idea that she was doing it, because we always told him, don't tell anybody. You can't tell anybody. And we impressed us to such a degree, they wouldn't even tell their spouse. And so I know one guy came up and said, I got to quit doing this. My wife's ready to leave me because I'm going out at night and she doesn't know where I'm going and I'm not telling her, you know. So that was the interesting thing there. One of the things that I was interested in, you mentioned you wanted to know some of the rewards we got from the work we were doing. So there was a lady who was a single mother that had 3 kids, 2 boys and a daughter. The oldest boy, he was just there, but the youngest one got connected into the drug trafficking or drug scene. And so we picked him up and we started doing things with him, working with him, one thing or another. And she was so appreciative of us and how we were interacting with her son, that if he was going out at night and she knew that he was with us, she didn't worry about it. And I got invited to their place for dinner one night. And so I went, and they were so poor. I walked in the house and there was no furniture, none. We ate dinner sitting on the floor. And for dinner, I had one pork chop, about 2 spoonfuls of peas, and a small portion of mashed potatoes. But felt very honored that they would do that. You know. So that was one of the good things about working dope. Yeah.
When you were working dope, in the time, were drugs a big problem in Boise? I mean, it seems to me you've got some good stories and there's a lot of stuff going on, but was it a problem?
Well, that's all subjective.
Right, right.
And if you ask the people, it was a tremendous problem. So we were working a lot of overtime. My shortest overtime month was February, because it was a short month, and I only had 106 hours overtime that month. But because we were making cases at night, we were going to court during the day, and then we'd go right into the night, and we were just, we had the people that were trying to be like the big drug dealers of the big city, and so this is one of the things I said is, if a person is trying to be recognized, say for an example, like a North Side gangster, okay, he's going to do more idiotic things than the real gangster just to prove that he's a gangster. And that's the way that the drug deal was. They were guys that were shooting people, they were packing guns, they were, like Craig, he blew up our informant's car, things like that. So, and the people, the public, didn't know anything about drugs at all. This was all new to them. So it was a major problem as far as they were concerned. I got invited over to a school one time. They asked if I would come talk about drugs to the health class. And I said, yeah, and they said, well, there's 4 classes, 1 hour each. And I said, yeah, that's no problem. I can come over and talk to a class of 30. So I go over there and they said, oh, by the way, we discussed this. I hope you don't mind, but we declared a school assembly for that 4-hour block. And you're going to be talking to the entire student body. And that's the way it was, we did, it was really a wide variety of things. We were going all the time, but it was very rewarding at times. Years later, and then this is another good story, I think, made me feel good. I went to work and I was working the swing shift because that's what I did. But walked in and records said, hey, do you know this guy? And mentioned the name, and I go, yeah. And they said, well, he came in and asked about you and wanted to say hi to you. And I said, oh, really? And they said, yeah, they said that you arrested him and sent him to prison. I said, yeah, I did. And they said, well, he came by and said he wanted to thank you. He went to prison, got out of prison, got off the drugs, got married, had a couple of kids, had a good job, and he was just going to another job, came through town, wanted to stop and thank you. So, that was one of the things about my wife. My wife laughed because I've had cases where I'd call people up and say, hey, we got a warrant for you, come in and get arrested. They'd say, okay, and they come in and get arrested.
Skip, at some point, you moved from narcotics to major investigations. Was that a promotion? Was that...
No, it was just something to do.
Okay.
I was back working patrol at the time, and interestingly enough, at the time, we had this neighborhood team policing concept. So they divided the city into 4 divisions. And the chief put a captain in charge of each division, and he was like the chief of police of his division, and he got a certain number of men, and he could utilize them however they wanted. So Our division, I was in the Central Division, which was the downtown area, went out Broadway. But we had 2 investigators and work patrol. The investigators did the investigation, but patrol, if they had, say, a burglary and they had some leads on it, then they were encouraged to follow up those leads as far as they could go before they handed it over to the investigator. So while this was going on, we had a kidnapping with a person being held for ransom. And so they needed another person to do the investigation. I don't know why they picked me, but they picked me to do it. So that was an interesting case because this guy worked in Albertson, which is a major grocery store chain here. He worked in their warehouse, and he was working nights, and he went on a break and didn't come back. And then they got notified that he was kidnapped, and they were demanding a ransom from Albertsons for a huge sum of money. And they said, if you don't believe we're serious, we'll cut off his ear and send it to you. So anyway, we got in. I got assigned that case. So I was working it. Well, come to find out, it was all a phony deal. So a couple of days into it, he shows up in Nampa saying, "Don't pay the ransom, I've escaped." So I go over, talk to him, we get involved in doing this. Now, one of the things about this I failed to mention earlier, but you were talking about the ranks. We had patrolmen, and then we had this classification, I guess you might say, called a specialist. And to be a specialist, you had to write a term paper like on a specialty or something and do a bunch of stuff. So I chose forensic, physical evidence for my term paper. So I really was involved in, from the very beginning, I was involved in photography and forensic evidence, things like that.
So you were, I think we talked a little bit about this, you were the kind of a CSI then.
Yeah, but that was before we had CSIs.
Right.
So anyway, so I was doing this. So in this, he had a motorcycle helmet. Well, we printed it, and there were, he said, what happened was, he said, I've been held captive at this little flea bag motel, and I escaped, and I went over to this other place and called the police. So we go to where he was being held prisoner, and there was a motorcycle with motorcycle helmet and all this. So I dusted the motorcycle helmet, and his prints are all over the motorcycle helmet. So I said, so why are your prints on this motorcycle helmet? And he said, well, I was going to escape on the motorcycle, so I grabbed the helmet and put it on. And I go, so you were going to escape your captors, and you had enough sense to thinking to grab your motorcycle helmet before you escaped on the motorcycle? He said, oh, yeah. So we said, okay, things are looking suspicious. So then we looked at his vehicle, and he had a pickup with a cab-high camper shell on, a little bit higher than cab-high. And so I looked in there, and lo and behold, he had like a carpet there, and I could see what looked like a motorcycle tread on that carpet. So then I got to searching there, and I found a little sliver of metal there, so I saved it. And then I got the motorcycle, and I got to looking, and what happened was, when he put the motorcycle in his pickup, he had to undo one of the mirrors. So when he undid the mirror, that little piece of metal fell off the thread on the mirror. So I could match that piece of metal with the mirror on the motorcycle and say, that motorcycle was in your pickup. Okay. Then on the motorcycle itself, there was a hair. He put the sticker on, the year expiration sticker. There was a hair under that sticker, and it was his. Okay. So that was another clue. So then I took a photo lineup to the people, and they picked him up as the person buying the motorcycle. But he had a different name. And what he did was, he went into the transportation office at the warehouse, and all the drivers had to turn in their driver's license to get pictures and stuff. He took one of the other workers' driver's license and took it in to pretend to be him to buy the motorcycle. So this innocent person was buying the motorcycle used in the crime. Well, this is a convoluted story, but kind of complicated. But he listened to some sidewalk attorney and said, "Don't talk to the cops." So he went and talked to the police. So then it got out that his name was on the purchase agreement for this motorcycle. So they were asking us, his boss, and asked if we could clear him, and we said, "No, he won't talk to us. We don't know anything about this." His wife happened to work for the bank where they were getting the money to pay off the ransom. So now her job was in jeopardy. This kid was going to school at Boise State, and so he was being ostracized by all the people there and everything. So finally, he got a different attorney. The attorney called us up and said, "Hey, will you allow me to be present when you interview my client?" We said, "Sure, come on in." He came in, he told us the story, it exonerated him. We called everybody up, said, "Hey, he's cleared," and everything. But it could have been very serious with him listening to the sidewalk lawyers on this, because he was getting, he was being convicted by the public before even being charged. So anyway, to go on with this, with all this evidence against him, he pled guilty. Okay, to being kidnapping himself and the attempted extortion and all that. So then, about 2 or 3 years later, we're working in the city-county building up here on Barrister, and I'm right around the corner from the county detectives. And one of the county detectives come over and say, "Hey, you remember this case?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, this guy's missing again, and his wife thinks that he's been kidnapped again." I go, "Really?" He says, "Yeah." And his story is that he pled guilty just because they threatened his family, so he pled guilty. Well, by pleading guilty, no evidence came out. So we called her in. I gave her all the evidence. She said, "Don't look for him anymore. I'm filing for divorce." That was it. But yeah, and that's how I got involved in major crimes. And after that, it just kept going.
So she thought he basically was trying to kidnap himself again?
Well, yeah, I don't know. We don't know because he disappeared and said he was kidnapped.
Got it.
But she said, let him
Forget
it. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about this, but that major investigations unit covered things like homicide, armed robbery, rape, stuff like that. Was there a particular case was there a particular investigation, whether it be in rape, robbery, murder, whatever else? Was there certain investigations that you like to do more than others?
You mean like types?
Yeah, like did you like to do the murders over the rapes or the armed robberies? Did you just kind of find them all fascinating?
No, they were all interesting. They're all interested. Every one of them are different. They were all different, basically, but they were similar. There was a lot of, evidence is evidence. Fingerprints, footprints are footprints. But then there again, there was a lot of new things coming out during my career that other people were not aware of. As an example, we had a homicide where the victim was beat with 2x4s, some little 2x4s about 4 feet long, 3 feet long. And so at the time, I knew there was no way I could develop fingerprints off of wood. So I gathered up my evidence, and I didn't mark it or anything because I wanted to package it and send it to the FBI or to the FBI, see if they could somehow develop a print off the wood. Well, at the time, our department did not consider physical evidence being of any importance. Nobody, the detectives always said, "We never made a case on fingerprints. We don't believe in that." So the lady that was in charge of property basically was just a property custodian, was not an evidence custodian, had no training or anything. So she saw all this evidence come in with no marking on it. So we had this evidence tape that would break apart if you tried to pierce the seal. She put around all the evidence where these guys would have been holding on to that. So yeah, it was just things like that. But I got to one case I did make was a rape case, which was kind of interesting, and I have to give credit to the guy that worked with me. And this was when we were working dope. This girl had left town. The lady left town, had been gone from Boise for 10 years, came back to town, got into Boise about 10 o'clock at night, got kidnapped, taken out somewhere in the weeds, and got raped and brought back to town and dropped off. She had no idea where she was or anything else. The suspect made her lay down in the seat so she couldn't see where she was going. So Tom, he was with the county, and he and I got assigned this case. He put her in the car, had her lay back the seat, close her eyes, and give him directions on how she thought they should be going. It started from 17th and State, went down State Street, down Broadway, out Boise Avenue, got out to Barber Park, turned. She said, we turned and we went down this steep embankment, and then we made a U-turn, and we stopped, and I could hear water running, and there were some cars going by. I could hear that. So then he backed up and we moved. And so Tom backed up and went over a rock. And she says, I remember the rock. So he got up there, went down, went across the road, went over, took her over, pulled off the road, took her across the fence and raped her. So he said, well, when you crossed the fence, could you break away and run? She said, no, because the fence was low and he just stepped on it. We stepped over. So we found that. We found where he had laid her down. She said, there was a rock in my back, and I was feeling around for a rock to hit him, but I couldn't find any. We found the rock. We found the toe impressions and the knee impressions with him. But did all the photographs and all that stuff. Went back and I took plaster casts and photos of the tire prints, and then I took soil samples. And I sent it to the ATF lab. When it came time, we ended up arresting the guy. And we sent it to the ATF lab for analysis. And at the time, it was a 1-ton truck that he was driving. So I took the mud flaps off the truck, sent it back. I asked them to do a neutron activation analysis on it. They called me back and said, our cyclotron is broken. We can't do that. So I said, what are you going to do? And they said, we're going to do an atomic weight analysis of your soil samples. So I said, okay, great. So come time to go to the trial, and there's this strange guy in the office, in the prosecutor's office. And he says, hi, I'm from the ATF lab, and we had the defense attorney in there. He says, I'm prepared to testify that the soil samples you sent me, the soil samples off the mud flap could not come from more than 150 feet away from your samples you sent me. So the guy walked in and pled guilty.
Skip, some of the stuff that you're talking about in terms of the CSI stuff that you were part of seems pretty sophisticated even for that time. How did you come up with that knowledge to do those type of things?
I don't know. I was just interested in it. So
did you read up about it on your off time?
I was reading. No, I didn't study that particularly, but I was reading the FBI bulletins. I was reading Law and Order, the different publications like that. So that was some of the things that I found. One of the things that being a CSI that I thought was really good. About 5 years ago, well, that would have been, probably about 2019, maybe 2020, I got a call from Monty Iverson, who was at the time still working as an investigator for Boise PD, said that they just made the case and convicted the homicide suspect in a crime scene I processed. And that would have been before 1998. So all that time later.
Was that because of DNA?
Yeah. They got the DNA and then the stuff that I had collected back then made the case.
So it was fortunate that you were pretty diligent and picky in what you were taking.
Yeah.
At some point, you stop doing major investigations and you go to training. So tell me why you went to training and what did you end up doing there?
Oh, well, I went to training before that.
Oh, okay. Well, tell me about training.
I broke my leg.
Oh.
And so, I broke my leg. And so they had they had to do something with me because I was a rookie, and so I was on the radio for a while. Didn't know what I was doing there, but anyway, I muddled through that. But anyway, they sent me into training, and so what I ended up doing there was I worked in training at the time. We had um, assistant chief was overall, but then we had a sergeant was in charge of training, and then there was me, and that was about it. I think we had a secretary. That was it. Anyway, I got tasked with creating a police academy, and so I did. And I put together the curriculum, and we took that to post and got approved to teach it to our officers. And so then I taught it to the officers, and I think I can honestly say I'm the only person who taught an entire post academy, except for firearms. But because now with post, they have guest lectures come in all the time. So nobody teaches the whole thing. They
Right.
teach their specific areas of expertise, but I taught the whole thing. And then after I was done teaching it, then our officers would go over to post and take their final exam and pass it and
Well,
be
how
certified.
many different topics were you teaching at the time then?
All of them.
I mean, was it like, let's say there more than 10 topics that you were teaching?
Oh, well, I don't know.
I guess my point is, let's just say it's over 10. How did you come up with the curriculum to teach an entire class at Post what they were doing, the training that they were going to go through?
Uh,
All right, we got interrupted, but the question I had for you is how did you figure out how to teach an entire police academy?
well, for one thing, is I had the information as to what Post was teaching in their basic academy, so I knew what subjects to address. The other thing is, about that same time, I was getting my degree in criminal justice administration from Boise State, so that helped out. In addition to that, I got and my sergeant was training. He and the assistant chief, they had put together a curriculum to teach at Mountain Home Air Force Base interested officers who were being released from the Air Force who might be interested in going to law enforcement. So they were doing that, so I was helping them do that. And then I got involved in teaching a high school class called Police Science. And so in that curriculum, I started out with the history of policing with the shires and the shirees, and going through the Bobby Peel's era and working up to modern day things, and covering search and seizure and laws and criminal, all that stuff. So it kind of dovetailed all together like that.
Yeah, you seem to be in the right place at the right time and having all this experience going on.
And but the here again, this is one of the things that I have seen happen too often. Is it was a good program, but because it was good when we put it together, they never updated it. So, as you well know, law enforcement and medicine is just advancing at light speed. And if you don't upgrade, then you become obsolete. And that's what happened. After a few years, in fact, it was several years, that program became obsolete, and they ended up then sending the officers to post for the academy. Now, what goes around comes around, because a year or two ago they went back to teaching their own academy at the police department.
Interesting.
So yeah,
you were. I find it interesting because you started in '67, and it seemed like you worked through several different generations of policing. Did you notice a change in, not necessarily policing, but did you notice a change in attitude of the way people saw police and dealt with you? Was there a change in attitude?
Uh, no, not really. Not in Boise, which was one of the reasons why I liked Boise. In fact, I was offered a job with the Secret Service and again another one with the FBI. And I talked to my wife about it, and then another one with the state. And the the problem was the one federal agency wanted me to go to, I think it was L.A. or San Francisco to work the tongs down there. The other one wanted me to go to Chicago or something to work the gags there. The state wanted me to work dope, which at the time was very, very attractive to me because our federal project was expiring. And so we didn't know what was going to happen with our unit. And so I went in and talked to the chief, and that's probably the closest I came to leaving the department was to continue working dope, and then decided not to do that. And one of the things that I just mentioned the other day, was a problem I had, which is not unusual. You get so immersed in working dope that you start identifying with those people and stuff. And I found I was having a difficult time communicating with normal people because I was using their language. And I'd talk about stuff and I'd have a blank look on these people. And I thought, I'm spending too much time talking to these people. I got to get out of here and get back to real people. So yeah, that was the thing. I tell people this: working narcotics is the most dangerous um, subject, I guess you might say, or field you can work for your career. Not whether or not you're going to kill, but whether or not you're going to destroy your career. I've known so many officers that were good officers on the street, good officers who are in patrol, investigators, whatever. They go in working dope after a couple of years, and for one reason or other, either their marriage falls apart, their department, they start violating department rules, they start breaking the law, they do different things like that, and they're done. And it's really hazardous to their career, and it takes a real, that's one area I think it takes a real special person with a special personality and a psychological makeup to be able to work dope for many years and do a good job and continue doing a good job.
Do you have any personal ideas why that is, in terms of why that may take a toll on somebody's career or personal life, working narcotics?
You see the downside. You see the bad things that happen when people are working dope. So then all of a sudden you want to make your cases, and it becomes a personal thing. And I always tell people you don't want to get personally involved in your cases, but working dope you do, because you're seeing the ravages, the downside of what's happening to the, if you will, the innocent people, the parents, the siblings, the children of these dopers. And regardless of what happens to them, it's the innocent people around them. And so you want to make that case, and you're pushing the limit in making the case. We just had a case where a person officer, I don't know if he got decertified or not, but the issue was that they were getting a search warrant, and he didn't wait for the search warrant to arrive before he started his search, which is a violation of the rules. And so the post Office of Professional Responsibility say you can't do that, and we're going to decertify. Mm. So he was just over aggressive in making the case. He should have waited, and now he can't be certified as an officer. And that's why I say it takes a very strong person with strong morals, a psychic, that he doesn't, break down and see, when you're seeing what's happening to these kids and stuff, to, start taking it out on the perpetrator. Mm. So yeah.
So Skip, one last question that I always like to ask people. You were in law enforcement for 33 years. If you can look back to when you started, to when you retired, or even now, did being in law enforcement affect the way that you see people?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because you know, and this is one of the things that I like to think I maintained, was to understand that all people, there are good people in all walks of life, but there are also bad people in all walks of life. And when I start seeing cues from someone, regardless of their social status, regardless of their economic status, if they appear to me that I see picking up those cues, they're bad people, they're bad people. It's just that simple.
Skip, I really appreciate the interview. Thank you very much.
Yeah. You know, I had one story I forgot.
Oh, go ahead.
One of the things that, because you were wanting to know some of the rewards that we got out of this. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So I got a couple of quick stories.
Sure.
One, I was at a restaurant eating lunch here a couple of years ago, and the guy walks up to me and says, "Are you Skip Nakashima?" And I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "Well, let me tell you what, 50 years ago," and he says, "I know it was 50 years ago because my daughter just turned 50. My wife was pregnant in a crash and you helped her, and you are her hero because you helped her out." And I said, "Thank you." Then another time, and I told the chief this the other day, I saw this guy in a bar and he looked at me like he ought to know me, and I looked at him like I ought to know him, but we didn't make that connection. He came over and said, "Are you Skip Nakashima?" I said, "Well, why do you ask?" And he said, "Because in 1972, we had been out drinking and we went to a restaurant and we were coming out of the restaurant and my ex-wife lost her contact and we were crawling around on the ground looking for her contact, and you showed up working and helped us and found the contact." And I said, "Well, good, thank you." And I said, this was 60 years later, 50 years later, and this guy remembered that, and that was the contact with the police that was a positive contact. He remembered that, so.
How do you think law enforcement can have a more positive interaction with people these days?
It depends on the officer and how you do it. One time after 9/11, I was walking down the concourse. I went out and helped out there for a while. Walking down the concourse. And, in an airport concourse, everybody's going the same direction. You're either going to the gate or from the gate. So I'm walking down the concourse, and there's ladies behind me. And we're walking past several gates. And finally, just to be funny, I turn around and say, "Are you following me?" And she said, "Yes, I am." I said, "What?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "Skip, you may not remember me, but when you were working major crimes, you were investigating rapes, and I was with Rape Crisis, and I liked what you were doing, and I want you to know that I am following in your footsteps and working with rape victims." All that time.
Wow.
So those are the things that payment is not just in money.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Skip, thanks again.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
You bet, Niles.